Welcome, everyone. My name is Mopia Piri, a customer research advisor at Doability, the makers of SurveyCTO. Recently, we introduced new features in SurveyCTO that enable seamless offline working. And so during this webinar, we will cover these features in a bit more detail. So just a quick overview of what we will cover here. We'll split our webinar into two parts. The first part will focus on gaining an understanding of dataset publishing and examining some improvements that we have made to the dataset publishing process. And then the second part will explore some advanced offline features, including the ability to publish datasets offline and to transfer cases offline. So hopefully you're excited to get into those different areas. So first of all, let's talk about dataset publishing. For those that are not familiar with the idea of several datasets, this is simply data that is stored on the server in rows and columns. So here in our diagram, we have an example of a dataset that is right at the center there. And so it's a data store for information coming from different places. A server dataset can be attached to a form for preloading, and data can be published from a form to a server dataset. When we talk about the idea of dataset publishing, we are simply referring to the process of automatically updating a server dataset with data submissions. Okay, so a dataset here, rows and columns, and then publishing is pushing data from a form into that particular dataset. And so those are some of the concepts that you see us applying as we go along. So in publishing data, there are two important elements to take into account. One of them is format, okay, which is how the data will be displayed. And we have two choices for that, a wide format or a long format. And then we have options. Basically, the options are the ways in which the new data will be merged with existing data. And here we have options like replace, options like add, or concatenate. Okay, so we've got a sense of what that is. So let's get into the formats first. With SurveyCTO, you have the option to publish your data, your form data in either wide format or long format. One of the key differences between wide and long is how they deal with repeated data. So let's see what that looks like. So in wide format, publishing, each of the submissions will either add a new row or update an existing row. Okay, so in our picture here, there are 4 submissions, and we can see that there are 4 rows that have been added to our dataset. So that's the idea around wide publishing. And when we're dealing with repeated data in wide publishing, all the instances will be included in a single row. Okay, so if it's repeated data, it will all be in one row, but each of the fields will have a numbered column. So if we repeat the field age, so then there'll be age 1, there'll be age 2, there'll be age 3, columns that represent those different repeat instances. When it comes to long format, every submission can result in multiple rows being updated in a server dataset, primarily thanks to the use of repeat group. Each time a repeat group is repeated, a separate row will be added or updated in the server dataset. So we have one submission here. This would essentially show that in this one submission, there were 4 repeat groups, and they created those 4 separate rows. This is useful, for example, if you're going to collect information about a class. So you get information about a whole class, but you also want to track the individual students in that class. This will be one way in which you can do it. You get one submission for the class, and then you have repeated information for the members of the class. It can be published in long format. So those are format options. So let's look now at some of the options that are available. These are the different ways in which we can combine data when we are publishing it into a dataset. Okay, so the first publishing option is replace, which is also the default setting. With replace, any existing values will be replaced. For instance, in our example here, we have the data set starting off with a value of 1 for the field health temp. A submission is received, and the value of health temp in that submission is 0. So when this value is published to the dataset, it will replace the one that was there, and now the dataset will have a value of 0. So essentially, the existing values are being overwritten. The second option is add, and this enables us to increment existing values. We have an example here again. We've got a data set, and it has the value num visits with 3. A submission comes, and it has a value of 1 for add visit. Add visit publishes into the field called num visits, as we can see from the top here. And what that add essentially does is to get the value 3, add 1 to it, and then num visits will be updated to 4. So that's the idea of the add option. Obviously, for this to work well, you'd have to be working with numeric values. And then finally, there is the concatenate option, which allows you to append new values to existing values. You can choose to append the new value before or after the existing value, and you can also choose what kind of separator is going to be used to separate the values. In our example here, we start off with a field temperatures in the dataset. It's got 2 values, 37.5, a pipe there, and then 37.9. So that's the idea of a separator. In this case, it's a pipe. A new submission comes in, and the new value of temperature is 37. What we have, because we are concatenating, is that the value 37 will be added to the front here. You can see how this is useful if you're going to be keeping track of historic data. It's easy to just pull temperatures from your data set, and you can see how the temperature has changed over time. So those are some of the options that we have in datasets. Long format publishing, as well as the add and the concatenate options, are all brand new features. So if you have a server and you upgrade that server to 2.8 going upwards, you have these features available for you already. So please feel free to give them a try if you haven't tried them out already. And then now let's move on to our advanced offline features. So there are 2 key features that are available as part of this package. The first one is offline dataset publishing, which allows us to create powerful and flexible form workflows that can be used in any location. And then we've got offline case transfer, which basically enhances our case management capabilities, and you're able to do much more with case management now. These features are not included in the standard subscription, but you can activate them by just getting in touch with our sales team. We'll be able to share a link to a form that you can fill out if you're interested in having these advanced offline features on your server. So let's look at these in turn. Let's start with offline dataset publishing. So as previously highlighted, we saw this diagram a bit earlier. Dataset publishing exists in SurveyCTO already. So you can publish data into a server dataset, and that data can be used either by the same form or by other forms as needed. And the way you do that is quite simple. You basically submit a form to the server. Once that form is submitted to the server, it updates the dataset on the server. Once that has happened, you can download a copy of that updated data set back to your device, and then you can access that new data. It can be accessed in the same form, or maybe another form can access the same database data set and download that same data. This works great, but there's one limitation. For you to submit forms to the server, you need to have an internet connection. And for you to download an updated version of the server dataset, you need to have an internet connection. And this is where offline datasets come in. So the idea is essentially the same, except now your forms can access a local copy of the dataset. When the dataset is downloaded from the server, you have a local copy on your device, and from that point, you can work offline. Okay, so here's an example in the diagram here. We download our form. As we're downloading our form, we download our dataset. And now we have a local copy of our dataset. As you fill out forms, they update this local copy of the dataset, and the forms can use it. So whatever data has been published in here is accessible to the forms immediately, because this is happening locally on the device. So the steps are quite similar. You finalize a form on the device, but now you're updating the local data set on the device. And then you can access new data within the device. But when you have an internet connection, you can then synchronize with the server dataset. And so whatever you've collected offline will now become part of the dataset online, and other devices can also have access to those. Okay, this idea of publishing datasets will work with what you think of normal datasets, but also with case management datasets. Okay, so for those that are familiar with the SurveyCTO, case management is one of those workflows that depends on datasets, a special type of dataset called a cases dataset. And so you can use this offline for case management, but you can also do it for normal datasets that are not particularly case management datasets. All right, so we have an idea of what this is. So let's try and look at an example of this. So we'll look at a very, very basic example. I will switch over to my server console here just to show you the information that we have. So I've got a form. And in this form, basically, we're able to collect information that tracks how enumerators visit households. This form is connected to a dataset. This is a cases dataset. Now, I just wanted to show this quickly because I want to show that it's quite easy to get started with offline case management. So when you create a dataset, you can go into the settings for that particular dataset. And in the settings, you give that dataset a title, an ID, and then you need to give it a unique ID. Okay, so you pick one of your fields as your unique ID. You simply have a button here. Okay, and this button can be turned on or off. And when you turn it on, then you are essentially allowing for offline updates. That's really all it takes to get started. So if you haven't activated this feature, you will see a message here that says you don't have the feature activated. When the feature is activated, you simply be able to turn this on, and then offline dataset management is available for you. Our example here is going to be very basic. Let's switch over SurveyCTO Collect here. As you can see, my device is offline. So it's represented there by those red lines telling us that there's no internet connection. But you can also see that I have this in airplane mode. So I will go into manage cases. Okay, I have a number of cases here. This is basically going to simulate the idea of visiting households. Some of you might have worked with protocols where, for example, you require your enumerators to visit a certain household at least 3 times before you can close or skip that particular household. So what would happen is you go the first time, go the second time, go the third time. What this particular workflow shows is just that as you go to these places, if you don't have internet connection, have a good counter that allows you to count how many visits you have made. So let's assume we've gone to our second household, which is 1002. I will just click on that, and then I will open the form. And so as I open the form here, I will pick which enumerator is visiting this household. Okay, so this is something that's part of our enumerator functionality. If you haven't tried it out, please do try it out. So if I said no here, I can pick a different enumerator. I'll go forward. Okay, so we can see that for this enumerator, there's a summary here that tells us that they have not made any house visits, they've not closed any cases, they've not had any successful interviews. Everything is at 0. If I swipe forward here, I click confirm. This is the address we are going to, and now you can see that it tells me that this is my first visit. There have been no other visits to this household, and then we ask the question, is there anyone home? Let me, for argument's sake, say no, there's no one home. I will save this particular form. Okay. If I go back to my main menu here, we can see that there is one finalized form. It hasn't been submitted to the server. It is on the device because there's no internet connection. And if I go back to manage cases, and let's say I go back to the same household, okay? So I've picked the same household and the same enumerator. I go forward. You can see now that the household visit value has increased. Okay, there's been one household visit that's been made by this enumerator, and it's to this particular household. If I come here, I'm told this is visit number 2. Okay, so the counter is able to keep track of what's happening, and then it also keeps track of when I was last here. Okay, so I visited here a few minutes ago, and so I can then say maybe I don't have a visit here again and finalize that. Again, this information is just saved there. So I have 2 forms that haven't been filled out, but we can see that the idea of this counting is happening. So this is just a really basic example of what's possible with offline data sets. This particular example is part of a workflow that is available on our support center, and you can get that workflow and you can easily try it out. And if we look at the publishing that's happening here, and we see how this publishing is happening, we can see some of those different options that we had. So we're using the replace, we're using the add for that counter that's counting the number of visits, and we're using the concatenate for visit dates. And so you can apply these as best as is needed for the project that you're working on. All right. Okay, so that's offline dataset publishing. The next is offline case transfers. This really works well when you're using the case management feature. It takes advantage of Android nearby share feature. I'm sure some of you have used this to share maybe photos with each other. It's a very similar principle. We basically use that to transfer cases from one device to another without an internet connection. This is great for if, for example, you have a data collector who has created some cases on their device and needs to maybe transfer one case to another data collector. They don't have internet connection. They're able to, as shown here in the diagram, basically just have the devices within the case management options. One device is able to send, another device is able to receive, and then cases can be transferred from one device to another. We have a full video in our support center that goes through this whole entire process. So you can take time to watch that, and you'll be able to appreciate this a bit more. So those are just some of the features that we have available. And some of you might still be asking, how do we get started with these features? I mentioned earlier that essentially, if you want to get started with these features, the server dataset stuff is already available. You just need to update your server to 2.8. The advanced offline features, you would need to fill out a form, and then our sales team will be able to get back to you, activate that on your server, and then you'll be able to get started with those particular features. Okay, just a couple of things to mention before we get into the question and answer. Again, if you have any questions about any of these, if you're a paid subscriber to SurveyCTO, feel free to open a support ticket. Maybe you already have offline data sets activated for your server. If you have any question about that, please feel free to get in touch with our support team. If you don't have a server, you can always get in touch with our sales team. Maria is available anytime. Just reach out to her by email, and she can facilitate you getting started if you have any problems. If you don't have a subscription, there's also the community that's available. You can ask any questions that you have in the community. There are others who are working with SurveyCTO who will be able to help you answer those questions. But also you can reach out to us through our various social media platforms. You can keep track of what we are doing, some of these new features, see how others are using these new features, even through those particular areas. Thank you very much, everyone who has joined. I hope this has been helpful. We are available to support you at any time. Thank you so much for your time. Please feel free to drop off and carry out any tasks that you might have remaining. Thank you. We'll end here. Bye. Bye, everyone.